There we go. So the title of my sermon is Come On Up. So obviously you're not going to be able to tell what it's about, but you will soon. So we are called and required to climb the mountain of the Lord if we want the fullness of him. Okay? So God is momentous, right? He is unparalleled. He's unfathomable. There's no description that we can come up with. There's no logic that we can use that understands who God is. The only way we can try and understand him is by trying to understand his traits and his characteristics, right? But if we want to get closer to him, we have to climb this mountain. The mountain that is God, the mountain that God rests upon, right? And you will be tried and tested by the climb itself. But if you truly desire what God has, then you will continue to climb no matter the fear that may try and overcome you, because we know the fear of God is a good thing, right? As my father spoke, fear of God is something that is learned. It's not something that is, unfortunately, innate in us. There was a time where it was. If you look through history, people were terrified of false gods that never existed. They were horrified of them. They were terrifying beings of wrath and of power, and sometimes they would bless you, but mostly they would, drown you or something awful. Like they were very scared of these false gods, right? But we have lost that fear, right? We've lost fear of anything being above us, right? Of us not being the top. And we need that fear, right? Fearing God is a very, very good thing, right? Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." Right? The wisdom that fearing God allows us to have is in action and obedience. And this is why understanding fear is so important, right? Because even the fear that starts off your wisdom just keeps you from doing stupid things. Right? Because even just the fear isn't enough. Because that wisdom of just not doing stupid things isn't enough for you to actually grow. All right, fearing God does not give you scriptural or spiritual wisdom, but it keeps you from falling into sin and living in disobedience if your fear of God is real enough. Right? If your fear of God is real enough, it's going to act really like the law. Right? The law was meant to point out what sin was, but it didn't correct the hearts of those who just kept from sinning. Those are two different things, and one is not more important than the other, but they're equally important, and yet they're not equally adhered to. All right? Most of us just want to not sin, and yet that fear doesn't move you forward either, though. That fear may keep you from sin, but it's not keeping you moving forward. We need to keep moving forward, and we need to keep climbing despite whatever fears we may have of the climb itself. Right? We cannot allow the enemy to turn our fear of the Lord, which is to our benefit, into fear of the Lord that is our detriment. And many people fall into this also. You see people leave God and are too afraid to come back. Why? Because they think God is going to be standing there with a whip just waiting for you to just... Ooh, right? I've been waiting for you, and that's not God, right? We can't be so afraid of God or so afraid of failing God that we do nothing for him, right? And the enemy will twist a good fear into that, just like he can twist a good anything into that, right? There's always a way to twist something. Right? You should know about it if you've ever looked at, contradicting headlines and stuff, and you've probably seen it on shows and stuff, being a spin person. It's an actual thing where you spin something for positive or negative. And, the devil's the best person at that. So he can spin a good fear of God into a very detrimental one. Right? Yeah, like shame. Right? 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And this is why the initial fear is a good thing. But the fear that God gives you and wants you to have and instills in you is not a spiritual gifting. It's not a spiritual gifting, because if it was, it wouldn't say here that God has not given you a spirit of fear. Why? Because a spirit of fear is always going to be detrimental. The respectful kind of fear, the reverent kind of fear, the I'm not going to do that because I don't want to get smacked kind of fear is a good thing for you to have. And it's a necessary thing for you to have, because if you didn't have it, and as much as we already do have it, we still do stupid things. So realistically, we need more fear. Realistically, we need, we need God to instill a fear into ourselves that is like, no, not gonna, no matter what kind of peer pressure, no matter what kind of desires, no matter what kind of whatever, you say no to it because you're afraid of God. Right? I mean, many of us have had that more fear towards our parents than towards God. I mean, many of us have been afraid to ask our parents for things or tell our parents things because we're more afraid of them than we are of God. And that hasn't gotten you anywhere closer to Him or any farther in life. Why? Because the fear is directed to the wrong person. Right? The fear that God wants us to have towards Him is not a spiritual gift, but one that is learned and experienced. Right? As my father said, fear is something that is learned and is something that is experienced. There is no fear until you experience it. Right? No child is afraid until they're afraid. That's right. Right? Babies aren't scared of things until they're scared of things. Toddlers aren't scared of things until they're scared of things. People aren't scared of things until they're scared of things. Right? Before then, everything's fine, right? There's a lot of people who are perfectly fine, and then they get into a car accident, and now they're afraid to drive. Right? You're not scared of something until you are. Right? So the fear of God is learned and experienced. And unfortunately, many times we refuse to learn it, even though we've experienced it. And what I mean by that is many times you've gone through things because God has put you through things as consequences of what you've done, and yet you didn't equate the two. So now the experience that should have given you fear to keep you from doing it is just, I had a bad day. Right? The jerk on the road ran into me, I don't know what happened, ran through a construction area, got a pop tire. Versus, no, just because God didn't touch your body and say, thus saith the Lord, I have smited your vehicle, doesn't mean, right, it wasn't God telling you, hey, you got to have a little more reverence, a little more fear, a little more understanding. I shouldn't do that thing. Right? And yet, when we separate the two, we don't learn. Right? When it's just another bad day, when it's just another incident, we don't learn. And because we don't learn, then we don't grow. Right? The scripture says, my people perish for lack of knowledge, right? Who is he talking about? He wasn't talking about the people in the world. He was talking about the people in here. He said, my people perish for lack of knowledge. Who are his people? Those who serve him. Right? Who are his people? Those who are adopted into the fold. Those are his people. We are the ones who perish because we don't know. And unfortunately, many of the times we don't know is simply because we don't want to know, because we don't want to study, because we don't want to think God could do something bad to us because we go to church. None of that matters. Obviously, going to church is important, but it's not going to spare you from God getting upset at you. Right? And yet, we don't have that kind of fear anymore. And yet, it is imperative for us to have. Right? It's the fear of a child that knows if they act up, they get hit. If they disobey, they get punished. That obviously keeps them from doing said thing. Right? And, sometimes it might take multiple punishings. Sometimes it might take multiple hits for the same thing, but they'll learn. They'll learn one thing is better than the other. Right? They'll learn, I don't know, screaming at the supermarket. Maybe it's not worth it. Right? Right? Maybe it's not all that it's cracked up to be. And we have to know these things too, right? We can't separate them because then we perish, right? It's a healthy fear that allows us to make full use of the spirit of power, of love, and a sound mind that God put in us. But the enemy can easily turn a healthy fear, a reverential fear, into a detrimental fear that prevents us from climbing to the top of the mountain, because the higher we climb, the more that is revealed. The more we find out about ourselves, the more that needs to be let go of, stripped away, and left behind. Right? There's a certain level that everyone will reach in God. And it's not because there's a cap on you. It's because you put a cap on yourself of what you're willing to do, of what you're willing to let go of what you're willing to surrender, of what you're willing to say, you know what, God, I want your all in all, in spite of whatever comes with it. Right? There's a level. And it's not something that God has programmed in you. There's no reason everyone can't be like any of the martyrs today, because there are still people dying for this. It's not just the disciples that died for this. There are still people just dying from this today. In Africa, there are still people getting chopped up by machetes because of the gospel. What's the difference between them and you? Right? The difference between them and you is even though they were afraid to be chopped up, they said, nevertheless. But if someone came in here with a machete and was like, I'm going to kill you, who are you just going to be like, oh, well, I'm just visiting. Like, I ain't even a member. Like, I was invited. Like, realistically, well, right, realistically, how far are you willing to go? Right? What fear is going to keep you from it? Going to keep you from him? Right? Only you know. And for us in this country, it's always so many less extremes. Right? I don't want to separate from my friends. I don't want to separate from my family. I don't want to be ostracized. Right? I don't want to be talked about or looked at like, that Christian weirdo or... Right? It's always stupid things. It's always stupid things, and it's always going to be stupid things for us, And yet, none of them are ever going to be valuable enough to be an excuse to God. Right? None of the fears are going to be enough for you to be able to stand in front of God and being like, listen, he's going to be like, I don't know. That doesn't mean anything to me. right? Especially when he's the one who already said, about his own parents and brother, who's my mother and my siblings? Like, what are you talking about? I don't know those losers, right? As long as they're not doing the will of God, I don't know them. But if you love God, you keep climbing this mountain. All right, 1 John chapter 4, verse 18 and 19. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love. We love him because he first loved us. All right, fear is the beginning of wisdom, but a spirit of fear is a spirit of torment. And our life with God is not torment. All right, and this is where you have to understand how the enemy can twist fear, because obedience is not torment. It doesn't matter what the results of that obedience are. It doesn't matter if the results of that obedience is no one talks to you anymore. You lose your family, you lose your friends, you lose your house, you lose your car, you lose your job, you lose whatever. That's not torment. Right? Obedience to God in that is not torment, and yet the enemy will twist it so that you're more afraid of that and see that thing as a torment to you than obedience as that righteous thing to God. Right? Obedience is not torment. Letting go is not torment. Admitting you have sinned and seeking repentance is not torment. Surrendering is not torment. Choosing God's will over your own is not torment. Forsaking for the will of God is not torment. Losing time to pray is not torment. Fasting is not torment. Giving up your evening to be in church is not torment. None of the things that God has called us to do, none of the things that take effort for us to do, none of the things that progress us in God to do are torment. And yet, sometimes we're more afraid of the results of doing these things. So what is your fear towards? Right? Because a fear towards God would say, I'm going to do them because I don't want the outcomes of not doing them. Not, I'm not going to do it because I'm more afraid of the outcome of doing it. Right? We cannot allow the enemy to twist our fear in such a way, because now you're a mess. Right? Now you're going through years not changing. Now you're going through periods of your life not changing, and now you're wondering and you're upset at God, and yet you are more afraid of doing it in the first place than being in the place that you currently are for not doing it. And now you're mad at God. Don't get mad at God. Right? God never told you to not do it. He told you to do it. Right? It was, you allowed the enemy to twist the fear, though. The fear that was supposed to help you, be healthy for you. You allowed the enemy to twist it to be, I don't know if I can do that thing, because the end result is what? Right? You don't know what the end result is because you didn't even do it, so how would you find out? Right? All of these things that God asks us to do, asks us to surrender, asks us to grow in, are not things that we should be fearful of. Right? When we do not perfectly love God, we allow fear to rule us and determine where we go and how far we go in this climb. We can't have that. If you want to get to the top of the mountain, if you want to get to where God is, you can't have fear say, do you really want to keep going? Because realistically, the fear works different, right? If you're climbing on the edge of a mountain, you already have issues with heights, which, first of all, I don't know what you would be doing up there, but you're not going to look down, right? When you're climbing in God, it's the opposite. If you look down, you benefit yourself to see how far you've come. So he's going to make it seem like, oh, you don't even want to look down. But just stay here. You found a little cleft in the rock. You could just stay here. You cool. What fear are we working under? Right? Because the good fear that comes with perfect love keeps you going. And it keeps you climbing. But if we let the fear of the enemy rule us, you're never going to make it. Right? Do not fall victim to any of the things I listed, but if you live in any of the things listed, you are living in fear. And it is why you are tormented in life, heart, mind, spirit, emotions, dreams, interactions, etc. And those things will never change as long as you are with a spirit of fear. Spirit of fear comes with torment. I don't care what that fear is towards. It will come with torment. And yet perfect love, right, will cast it out. Right? Perfect love will cast it out. Perfect love will cast out the torment. There's a reason why Saul was comforted when David played. There's a reason why the spirit of torment that came to Saul, right? Heard about it in Bible study. There's a reason why the spirit of torment sent by God left when David played. It's not because he was just so good on the harp, so good on the strings, right? It's because David had perfect love for God. And that perfect love was able to cast out the torment that wasn't even on him. Perfect love can cast it out. But that means shifting, right? That means moving away from fear and choosing to perfectly love God. Right? When you choose to continue relationships because of fear of being alone, you surrender perfect love. Right? When you choose any sin, you are surrendering to that sin and you will be tormented because of it. Right? Whether that be by people, your own mind, guilt, or shame, you will be tormented by it. You may say, though, you can't love perfectly because there is nothing that we can do that is perfect, and I call that an excuse. Because to God, loving him over everyone, everything, and every situation is perfect love. But of course, you're not going to love God perfectly back. But when you choose God, his truth, his righteousness, his way over your own and over your own feelings, then you are loving him perfectly. It doesn't mean you're always going to be happy in it. But when you say, well, Lord, your will be done, that's perfect love. Even if in your heart you're afraid. Even if in your heart you don't want to do it. When you say, Lord, whatever your will is, that's the perfect love he's looking for. He's not looking for you to be all gung-ho about everything, because everything isn't gung-ho about. Right? We know that. Jesus was not gung-ho to be hung on the cross. It didn't say he went there worshiping. It didn't say he went there praising. It didn't say when he was on the cross he was singing hymns. And yet, it was the expression of perfect love, because sometimes that's what life feels like. It's not what life is, because, you're still alive. But sometimes that may be how life feels like. And even still, if you're willing to say, nevertheless, not my will but yours, you just loved perfectly. Right, Exodus chapter 19, verse 16 through 20. And then we'll jump to chapter 20, verse 18 through 21. If you're wondering why we're skipping the middle, because it's a lot of verses, and you should know the 10 Commandments. So, it reads, Then it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings, and a thick cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. Then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Now, chapter 20, verses 18 through 21. Now all the people witnessed the thunderings and lightning flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. Then they said to Moses, "You speak with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die." And Moses said to the people, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, and that his fear may be before you, so that you may not sin." So the people stood afar off, but Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. All right, and sadly, it's kind of like, what hope do we have when we don't have a display of that awesome might to instill fear in us? Because we know what happened with the people of Israel. It's kind of like the next week they were. All right, perfect love is what allowed Moses to climb the mountain up to God, because he saw, heard, and felt the same things the people did. And yet, while they were petrified with fear, Moses was able to draw closer to God. All right, because you have to imagine, before this, he met God in a little burning bush. He's seeing this display for the first time, like everybody else. And I doubt he was just like, "Oh, man, that's cool." He was probably like, oh man. Sorry, guys, we might all die. Like, I'm sure he was afraid. And yet, he knew God. He knew even in his display of awesomeness, which was, it was cranked down to so much. He still loved God. Well, everyone was afraid he was going to kill them. I assume his thought process was, well, I doubt he would bring us all the way here just to come down to the mountain and just kill us all. Right? This is the same God that spoke to me from the burning bush. Right? This is the same God that parted the waters. This is the same God that got us here. I know him. Right, and this is why our relationship with God is so important, because we have to be able to say, I know him. I know him. He's not going to do all of that. Right? He's not going to do whatever outcome the enemy has put in your head that he's going to do by being obedient of all things. All right, because Moses was able to go up to the mountain, to the top of the mountain. He was able to speak to God and had to relay what God spoke to him to the people. But there is no Moses for your life. Right? You have to be Moses in your life if you want to meet with God. If I go to the top of the mountain, it's for me. God is speaking to me. He's not speaking to me about you. You have to get to the top of the mountain in your life if you want to speak to God. There's no Moseses. Right? I'm not Moses. My father isn't Moses. My mother isn't Moses. We can't climb the mountain of the Lord and bring down a word for you. Right? The times that God allows, right, the prophetic voices to activate and to speak into your life, well, amen. But you could have that every day, just between you and him. If you're willing to climb to the top of the mountain. Right? You are your own Moses. You have to be your own liberator from some situations. You have to go on your own exoduses from others. Right? God can open the door, but you got to leave. You have to take it. All right? There are times, where a Pharaoh in your life is like, all right, get out of here. But if you stay behind, what are you doing? Right? You have to act as the Moses in your life and do those things. God can open the door, but you have to actually do the walking. Right? Similarly, God can come down to the mountain, but you have to climb up it. You cannot let fear stop you from getting to God. Even unconscious fear. Right? Even fear that you don't even know that you have. You cannot have more fear of living in God's will than living outside of it. Right? You can't have more fear of what you're going to quote-unquote lose in the walk. You can't have more fear of what you have to let go of in the walk. You can't have more fear of what you can no longer do in the walk than having fear of doing whatever you want. That's backwards. Right? That is backwards. You cannot be afraid of what needs to be confronted in the fire, right? Because God came down and he set the mountain on fire, which means not only are you climbing through a mountain, you're climbing through a mountain that is on fire. And you can't be afraid of that. You can't be afraid of the things that need to be confronted in it, what needs to be burned away in it, what needs to be changed, what relationships need to be severed, what ideologies need to be dropped, what cultures need to be separated from, what family needs to be given up, what things you have to learn about yourself and confront in yourself, what pride, arrogance, ignorance, whatever, and how many ever things you need to be faced on the way up. There's a reason why the mountain was on fire, and yet Moses still walked up it. And Moses wasn't burned. Now, I wasn't there. I can't tell you if God cut a pathway for him or not. I like to think no, because it would just be cooler if he just ascended into a plume of fire unharmed and then came down with the 10 Commandments and everyone, oh my, what? But that's our life with God. You're going to have to go through the fire because if you want to meet God, well, God is an all-consuming fire. We know that. Right? The description of him just sitting on his throne is his feet are just flames. If you want to meet him, you're going to feel the heat. If you want to meet him, you're going to get a little scorched. But it's not going to be to your detriment. Right? You cannot be more afraid of letting yourself, everything, and everyone go in pursuit of the highest heights of the mountain of the Lord. Because God did not come down from the mountain. Moses had to go up it. God didn't come down and walk amongst the people. Moses had to go up. You have to go up. God's not going to come down and walk amongst you in your house and sit on your couch while you're watching Netflix and ignoring praying. Right? You have to go up to where he is. And yeah, going up is getting on your knees. But oh well. You have to go up. He's not just going to, all right, just turn that off for you. Unplug it so you don't even know what's wrong with it. And then force you to pray. Nope. It has to be you. It has to be your decision. It has to be your saying, I'm going to climb this. I'm going to get up there. Right? Jesus already came down and met us where we were. You have to now go up to where he is because he's up there on the right hand of the Father and he isn't moving or leaving his throne again for you. Right? Because it's time for you to come up to him. Right? Yeah, Jesus can come down and heal your wounds and da-da-da-da-da, but he's not going to then throw you on his back and carry you all the way up to the Father. That's your responsibility. You don't want to be here when Jesus comes back. He's already came. He's already gone. He's not coming back again to just put his hand on your forehead and be like, oh, my poor child. He'll do it in the spirit, but that's as far as it's going to go because this is our responsibility now. Right? This walk is our responsibility. It's not his. It's not his responsibility to make sure you walk it. He will point you in the direction. He will be that guiding light. He will help you, guide you by hand. He will do all those things, but he's not going to force you to walk. Right? He's not going to drag you around like you've seen parents do with kids in the grocery store, or with dogs that don't want to walk. You're just dragging on the ground. Like, he's not going to do that. He's not going to do that, because if he did, that's what everybody would be like. Realistically, if he was willing to drag you to the top of the mountain, I guarantee you would let him. Because it's less effort for me. I don't got to think about it. I don't have to do anything about it. But that's not the case. Right? You have to make the climb amidst the thunder, the lightning, the quaking, the smoke, and the fire, because no one else can for you. Right? You cannot be afraid to grow, to heal, to let go of, to move on. You can't be afraid of doing those things. And yeah, some of the things you got to do are going to be painful. Some of the things you got to do are going to be hard, but you can't be afraid of the hard work. You can't be afraid of the hard thing. You can't be afraid of the difficult thing. You can't be afraid of the thing that takes time. You can't be afraid of the thing that takes determination and dedication and consistency. You cannot be afraid of that thing. Things don't just work because you did it one day. Right? You don't just grow in the Spirit because you prayed once. Right? You don't just learn a new skill because you watched a YouTube video and you did it once. Things take time. Things take consistency, and this is the same thing. It takes time. It takes consistency. It takes you saying, whatever it is, God, let's do it. Right? God has made us all promises that cannot be achieved and cannot be fulfilled from the base of the mountain. Again, this is another reason why people get so frustrated, because they want to be down here and the blessing is up there. It's not coming down for you. It's not. It's the same thing if God said, hey, you got to go to, I don't know, Portugal. Whatever blessing for you is there isn't just going to transfer to the United States because you don't want to leave. Because you don't want to move because it's expensive. Because, I'm afraid of flying, God. It's not just going to leapfrog. Right? His blessings don't do that. There are things that if you're not on the top of the mountain, you will never see. You will never receive. Right? If Moses was so afraid and didn't walk up, they wouldn't have the commandments. Right? There are things like that in life. If you're so afraid to leave, if you're so afraid to do something, if you're so afraid of this, that, and the other, you're never going to see it. You're never going to see it. Right? It's up to us to get from the base to the top of the mountain. But that means it's going to take more from you. It's going to take more prayer. It's going to take more studying. It's going to take more fasting. It's going to take more church. It's going to take more effort. The higher you climb, the more difficult it becomes, not easier. Why? Because you need more. Just like any athlete, you can't stay at the same weight forever. It takes more from you. That doesn't mean you have to infinitesimally increase the time of prayer, but it means the depth that you start at cannot still be the same thing. That doesn't mean you don't start prayer with asking for forgiveness. Definitely do that. Doesn't mean you don't start with giving God reverence. Definitely do that. But it means when you start off, you don't start off with woe is me. Right? When you start off, you don't start off from some place that you've already overcome. Let's go a little deeper. Let's start a little further. Right? It doesn't make, if you're playing a video game, it doesn't make sense to every time you want to play it, start the new game over again to try and get back to and past the place that you just saved at. That's dumb. Maybe you understand the reference, maybe you don't, but it's dumb, right? If you're listening to music and, back when there was CDs, right? You're not going to start from the first song if you want to listen to the fifth song. Right? You're going to skip ahead. I know there's still CDs, but it's not like a lot of people listen to them, but right, you're not, yeah, right, you're not going to do that. You're going to start from the place you want to start with. Right, this is what I'm saying. Things take more effort. Things take more effort. Right? You got to do more studying in God. So maybe instead of reading 5 chapters like a lunatic, you read 1 and you actually really invest in it. You really study it. Right? Things take more if you want to go farther. If you want to go higher, it takes more. Right? Zechariah 13, verse 9, I will bring the 1/3 through the fire, will refine them as silver is refined, and test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say, this is my people, and each one will say, the Lord is my God. Right? We see this exact thing has already happened between Moses and God in verse 19, where it says, and when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. Right? You got to go through the fire to be able to speak to God like that. I mean, until Jesus came, no one was having regular conversations with God like Moses was. Moses saw God descending. I don't know. We don't know what he said, but God was like, oh, yeah, hey, Moses. Right? Moses goes up to the mountain, spends a lot of time there just chatting away. Right, Moses is the only one who wasn't a priest who could enter the Holy of Holies whenever he felt like it. You could enter the Holy of Holies once a year, and here comes Moses just being like, I got to talk to him. I just got to go in and see him. That's a different kind of relationship. Right? And yet it is something that is obtainable if you're willing to go through the fire. Right? We cannot receive answers from God if we are unwilling to climb through the fires that will refine us. Many struggle because of the simplicity of the gospel, but we struggle because of the change of it. That's a problem. Because the whole point is to be changed by it. And yet that's the point that we struggle with the most. We don't struggle with God giving us free salvation. We don't struggle with God making you promises or God wanting to bless you. You don't struggle with favor. You struggle with not being a jerk, right? You struggle with turning something off to spend time with him, right? You struggle with getting to church. You struggle with stupid things. But everything good, you're just like, yeah, I'll take it. That's a problem. Right? That's a problem because people are dying because they can't understand the simplicity of the gospel. And we're dying because you don't want to grow up. And yet that's the only thing that saves anybody. The only thing that saves people outside of church is being able to look at you and saying, wow, you're not who you were. Right, it's the most important thing for us is the change of the Lord. Right? It has to change you though, because if it didn't, it would be pointless. Right? If you don't change, your faith is pointless. If you don't change, the hours you spend in church are pointless. It's just a social club for you then. If you're not changing, if you're not transforming, if you're not putting the effort in, what's the point? Why go to the gym and never pick up a weight? It's pointless, right? Why go to the gym, run an hour on the treadmill, and then eat a whole slice of cake as big as your head? What's the point? It's pointless. Right? We can't have pointless faith. We can't live pointless lives. Right? Everything has to have a point. Everything has to matter. And this is why the scripture says that you're supposed to do everything as if you're doing it unto God, right? Because if you're doing that, then maybe you'll start caring. Right? Maybe it'll start mattering. And this pointless thing then becomes invaluable. Right now, this pointless thing that you see as low effort or as a waste of time or whatever it is, you see as, no, I have to do this. This is the most important thing for me to do. Right? It's going to be difficult to change you, though. It's going to be trying because you are climbing perfection. It's not easy. But it doesn't matter that it's not easy. The hard thing progresses you more than the easy thing. As you get higher, the flames and the heat become stronger, but it's for your benefit, right? Because the higher you go, right, it's easy for people to come to God and let go of, the easy things to let go of, the simple things, the things that they're already kind of dangling off, right? Similarly, you're in God. It's easy for you to start out, right? Just as like if you go and work out, call it noob gains, right? It's easier for people to gain strength and gain size and be like, oh my gosh, they're making a lot of progress. Not really. They're just kind of coming into the beginning. But then it gets hard, right? Because similarly, in God, it's easy for you to make those little noob gains. But then the stuck-on things take a little more heat. Listen, so we have a grill. If I crank it up to 400 degrees, it still looks dirty. It's not. It's very clean, right? 400 degrees kills basically everything. It's very clean. But if you want it real clean, you open that sucker all the way up, let the fire get to over 700 degrees, and then when you open it, it's starch white because everything's burned away. Listen, God has to do that with us too. Right? 400 degrees was nice. You got the food bits off. You killed some things, but we got to get you to stark white. Right? We got to get you looking brand new. That's going to take more heat. You can endure it. The grill's perfectly fine when you do it. Looks real nice, right? It's perfectly fine, and it makes real good pizzas when you do it. Right? But what do you want to be? Right? You want to be the thing that is clean but doesn't look clean? Or do you want to be the thing that is clean and everybody can see that it's clean? Because I guarantee you some people would look at the grill right now and be like, I'm not cooking on that or eating off of that. Why not? It's perfectly clean. Listen, you don't want people to be like, to not know that you're clean. You don't want people to question it. Right? And to do that, you better get higher. You better get in that hotter flame. Right? You better keep going higher. Right? The things you have to give up and let go, the longer you have to spend in prayer, the word, and fasting is for your benefit. Right? We can't think just because we have changed our mindset, our lives have changed. Right? No, that's not how it is. It's not enough just to try and redirect your mind and heart and not change your level of effort. Right? You can stop being a jerk. You can stop cursing. It doesn't mean you've really changed. Your vocabulary has fantastic. That's kind of ground level stuff. But have you changed? All right, that takes more effort. All right, this is why fearing the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but it's not going to give you scriptural, spiritual, or emotional wisdom. It will point out your sin and what not to do as the law did, but that's just the beginning. Right? Avoidance of sin isn't growth. All right, we can't think that I'm avoiding sin, so I must be getting better. No, I mean, the longer you ignore something, the less you're going to care about it, whatever that is. right? Just avoiding sin it's not an indication of growth. It's an indication of I'm not doing that anymore. Cool. You can avoid sin all you want, but you still don't pray. So you still don't grow and change, right? You still don't take a step closer to the mountain or up it. It don't matter that you're not sinning. Cool. But you're not growing either. So what's the point? Right? Isaiah chapter 43, verse 2. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the fires, they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flame scorch you. So I ask, what are you afraid of? Right? The fire you walk through for God will not burn you or scorch you, neither in an action of obedience nor in depths of intimacy with him. So what are you afraid of? Are you afraid of losing yourself in God? Because we all need to lose ourselves in God. Because we're all awful. If you're not perfect, you're probably awful. Or you're probably a hair's breadth away from being awful. Right? You're a bad day away from being the Joker. Right? It's the most famous comic book they ever wrote about him. One bad day turns a seemingly good person into a lunatic. Happens all the time. I mean, how many channels are dedicated to just all the murders? Right? And usually it's, man, this was one day they just whoop. Right? We're the same way. Just because we're in God, it doesn't mean you're not the same way. Right? But what are you more afraid of? Because you need to lose yourself. Because when you lose yourself, you lose that. Right? You're not the best you. And you will never be the best you when you are you and not him. How do you become more like him? You go to him. You learn from him. Right? The scripture says, come to me and I will teach you my ways. Right? It doesn't matter that he sent the Holy Spirit and the Holy Spirit's always with you. Cool. But you're not going to class. You're not doing the work. You're not learning anything. It doesn't matter if he can teach you all things, which he can. That's what scripture says. He'll teach you all things. But are you trying to learn anything? Right? Are you trying to let go of yourself and truly, truly, truly lose yourself in God? Right? Or are you afraid of losing your so-called identity? Listen, I'd rather be a part of God than an individual. You're part of God. All right, you're part of the King. Part of the creator of all things. I'd rather be that than anything else. Right? Growth in God comes through perseverance, through the fire, and up the cliffside. It takes confronting yourself and your fears in pursuit of coming face to face with God so that you can call upon his name and he will answer you. Right? Everybody has questions and everybody wants to know things that God only has the answers to. But if you're not there, you're not going to know. It doesn't mean he's not speaking. It means you can't hear. Right? Yeah, God can make himself so loud that you could be at the base of the mountain and you can hear him. But that's not what he wants. Right? If that's what he wanted, he wouldn't have had Moses come up to speak to him directly. He wants intimacy. He wants face to face. But you have to be the one who gets there. Right? Because at that point, the answer will be what you want because you will have been purified to the point where the will of God is your will. And there's no point to hang on to your own will. There's no point to hang on to your own desires. Right? There's no point because God's are so much greater for you. It's not even that, listen, you can aspire to be the greatest thing on earth, whatever the heck that is. And God's will still be better. Right? It doesn't matter what your hope, what your dream is, what your desire is. God's will still be better. That doesn't mean, If you want to learn, 3 languages or whatever, you should not. If your dream is to be able to speak 3 languages, yeah, sure. You could learn it. But if your dream is, I don't know, you want to own a sports team and God's like, nah, I got something better. Go with the better, even when it doesn't seem like it. Right? Because it might not seem like it until you're in it, and then you're just like, oh yeah, this is much better. All right, but if you are expecting God to change and bend to your sin, your desires, your ideology, your situation, your whatever, because you are too much of a coward to choose his righteousness and his righteous stance in your own life, then you are not only coward, but a fool. All right, it's time for us to stop being cowardly fools, because we have been called up to the mountain. All right, we cannot continue on at the base. We can't continue on just slowly, just kind of like, okay, I'll move now. I guess I'll go up now. I guess I'll try more now. I guess I'll pray a little bit more now. Every day we should be getting better. Every single time we do something for God, we should be getting better. And I remember when I first started preaching, the first thing I prayed was that every sermon is better than the last. And it has nothing to do with any of you. Right? It's not like I want to bring a better sermon for you guys. I want to bring a better sermon because that means I heard more. That means I understood more. That means he's been able to reveal more. That means he's been able to give me more wisdom, right? That means I've gotten closer to him. I don't want a better sermon just to, I want everybody hooping and hollering. I don't care. Your hoops and hollers mean nothing. Right? I'm still going to go home and do whatever I feel like it for the rest of the day, regardless of who hooped and hollered, regardless of, it was quiet or not. Still going to go home, take my pants off and chillax. Like, doesn't make a difference. Right? It doesn't make a difference. But I want to be better every time. I want to be closer every time. I want to be closer to perfection every time. And what that means as far as bringing messages, I want to be closer to the point where it's basically ventriloquism. Right? Because otherwise, what's the point? What's the point? All right, so we can't be cowards in this thing. We can't be fools in thinking that our way is better, or staying here is better, or lingering is better, or I could do this and that's better, right? We can't be foolish. We cannot be. There's more than enough fools in the world. There's the last thing the world needs is more fools in church. We already got too many of those too. Right? We have to be wise. And being wise means putting in an effort. Being wise means striving for wisdom. And that wisdom you're only going to find in God. That's where you find it. It's nowhere else. The higher you go, the more you'll find. Right? 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 through 10. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. And Moses was the only one who could go up to the mountain because he was chosen by God, and that same chosen special priesthood God has bestowed upon you. It's not separate. I've seen too many people look at my mother as like some kind of idyllic figure that God has lifted up and bestowed all these things upon and done all these things because, it's just her. It's not. It's not. Right? The reason she's at the level of the mountain that she is because she's put in the time. She's put in hours of prayer that you should wish that you had. Right? She's put in hours of study. Right? She's been methodical with it, consistent with it. It's a climb. It's a climb. It's not, well, some people are born more special. We're not talking about athletes. This isn't an athletic competition where, some people are just born 7 feet and they can already jump 52 inches and, you 4'11", you got a 2-inch vertical, right? It's not, that's not how the Spirit works. There's no unfair advantages from birth. There are no, you're already starting off in a better place than I am. No. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes progression. Right? It takes a dedication because you've already been called to go up there. Right? You've already been called to go up there, which means you better get up that mountain. Like, what are you going to do? If you want to stay at the level that you want to stay at, you can, but never complain about your life then. Never complain about what you don't have. Never get frustrated at God because of what he has not done. Because you haven't done anything either. Right? So never complain. Never complain. Because complaints are annoying enough already. But when you start complaining because you haven't done anything, that's the worst kind of complaints. That is the worst kind of complainings. But if you want God, you have to prove it. Right? And I've said that multiple times. Prove it by praying. Prove it by fasting. Prove it by maturing. Prove it by growing. Prove it by changing, because all of your growth and progress will be evident by how you will then walk and talk. Right? It's not something that, I am growing, you just haven't seen. No. It'll be obvious. Right? It'll be obvious because it has to be. It has to be because other people need to be able to see someone growing and be like, I can grow too. I can produce fruit too. I can level up too. I can get better too. But it's going to take effort. It's going to take effort. My mother had a dream a long time ago where it was me and her climbing a mountain, right? Scaling a mountain. And sometimes I'd be ahead and I'd have to pull her up. Sometimes she'd be ahead and have to pull me up. This is what this is. This is the point. This is why people need to see your own growth and your own change, because you're going to have to pull some people up. They're going to have to pull you up. But if no one's growing, if no one's changing, then everyone's dying. But it's not enough. It's not enough for leaders to be growing. It's not enough for me to be growing. I can't pull everybody up. I can't. Listen, if we're all tethered to a line and we're dangling off the mountain, I'm cutting y'all off like, slink. Sorry, but listen, I ain't dying. You can't. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Even when Jesus was here, he couldn't pull everybody up. We know that because the whole world wasn't saved. Right? We know that because there were places he went that he couldn't do miracles because of people just refusing. Right? Everybody needs to be growing. Everybody needs to be changing. Because you got to pull yourself up, but you're going to have to pull someone else up with you. In Micah chapter 1, verse 3 through 4, "For behold, the Lord is coming out of his place. He will come down and tread on the high places of the earth. The mountains will melt under him, and the valleys will split like wax before the fire, like waters poured down a steep place." Right? I understand that God can be scary, and you should be afraid of him. If you're not, then your arrogance in pride will be your downfall. But even though God is worthy of your fear, it is perfect love that protects us from melting as we draw near to him. And we can't be afraid to sweat in this. You can't be afraid of the heat. You can't be afraid of what you hear when you get up there. You can't be afraid to lose yourself, everyone, and everything you know on the way. Because either you sweat it out on the way to God or melt under him when he returns. And I would rather not do that. Psalms chapter 121, verse 1 through 2. I will lift up my eyes to the hills from whence comes my help. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth, right? The help you need isn't down here. It's up there. Right? The help you need isn't going to be found in a sermon or in the chorus of a worship song. It's on the top of the mountain. Don't think you can get by living at the base either. Right? Why do you think it was so easy for the people of Israel to live in sin? Right? Because even though they knew, even though they saw and they heard, they never saw or heard what was up there. Right? People see and hear about God all the time. They see and hear about his miracles all the time. They see and hear about how he's delivered, set people free, killed people, done this, that, and the other all the time. And yet they still go about living sinfully. Why? Because they never got up there. They heard and they saw in what? I don't know how much longer. Probably, hopefully, at least like a month before they started creating new idols. But that's people. Right? That's why it's so important for us to go up there. Because up there, you're not even going to be thinking about sinning. But as long as you linger towards the bottom or you linger in one spot, it becomes so much easier. Right? The lower you are, the easier it is to live how you want. But the consequences are the same. Right? It doesn't matter where you are in the journey. If you live how you want to live, the consequences are the same, just as any other sin is. Doesn't make a difference. Right, so in conclusion, Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 through 3. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. All right? We use excuses like time, being tired, and whatever else to not come to God like we are capable of. Not because of the excuse, but because of the fear. Because the more you confront God, the more you confront yourself. Because the closer you get to God, the more responsible you become for yourself. And we consciously and unconsciously avoid that. And we miss out on all that God has for us at the top. And yet, we should be the ones leading the charge in joy up the mountain of the Lord. We can never do this if we've never experienced what's at the top. Who's going to run to the mountain of God if you're at the base yourself? Or if you're just clinging on the side yourself, who's going to run up the mountain? If someone doesn't already go up there and tell the others of what they found. Right? This is why Jesus had so many stories of you find the treasure and you run around and you tell everybody what you found. You lose the coin. You find it. You run around, tell everybody what you found. Right? You find him at the top, not at the base. So I close with this. So what are you more afraid of? God or missing out on all you could have been if you made the climb? And that's the word of the Lord.